Muscle tightness is always a sign of muscle weakness. Well, the body always will tighten up when it senses instability. And so when there's muscles not supporting a joint properly, it's going to say to whatever muscles, tighten up, tighten up, tighten up, and ask a few important questions. But at the top of the list is, does this make me stronger or does this make me weaker? Namaste friends, welcome to my channel. If this is the first time you're landing here, and I hope it is, today we're going to be talking about the psoas, one of my favorite muscles, often referred to as the muscle of the soul. I'm the author of Stop Stretching, a new yogic approach to master your body and live pain-free. And this episode is dedicated to the new series that we've started called the Stretching Police. And part of our job is to go out and give people tickets. Stop stretching. Just kidding. It's all done in fun and jest. However, what we're aiming to do is to arm you with the information you need to have to go back out into the world and ask a few important questions. But at the top of the list is, does this make me stronger or does this make me weaker from a neuromuscular perspective? My number one favorite muscle talking about is the psoas, and I could never understand for years, and when I say years, I mean the better part of 30 years, why I suffered so intensely with lower back pain and hip pain. And I realize now a lot of it had to do with my psoas. The psoas is the biggest hip flexor in the body. It's actually a really long muscle. It attaches to the lesser truncanter of the femur bone and then weaves up through the iliac crest, and sometimes some people call it the iliopsoas because we have that muscle that actually attaches to the pelvic bone, the inside of the pelvic bone, and then comes up and attaches starting at L5, the lower lumbar spine, all the way up to T12, the thoracic spine. So it's connecting so many bones of our body together and is responsible for so much stability. One of the things that is often not talked about, in my opinion, enough about the psoas is the importance that it plays in maintaining that curvature of the lumbar spine. So what often defeats that curve is when we're sitting. Just as I'm sitting right now, I'm kind of slouched, and so my lumbar spine is actually curving the opposite direction. Well, that's going to have a detrimental effect over time on the psoas muscle. So it's really important to A, learn how to sit better, but also, more importantly, to also make sure that that psoas is working, it's able to contract and contract on demand, and that we're not doing things to give it more stress. So I want to dive right into this video. This is a video by Yogi Aaron, and he actually is very knowledgeable, but there's definitely some gaps in his knowledge from an AYAMA perspective. And so let's just start and watch it.
Let me introduce you to your filet mignon muscle, your psoas, and you'll also meet his kid brother.
So remember earlier how I was talking about how long this muscle is? You can see how long this muscle is. It is a big muscle.
Iliacus. Before we get into that, let me ask you a question. When you're in a lunge, do you feel tightness on the top of your back leg? When you're in upward facing dog, do you feel compression in your lower back?
Okay, so he's going to attribute this to the psoas, which is complete bullpucky. He's talking about here, do you feel tightness in the front of the leg? So from an AYAMA perspective, and really from a biomechanical perspective, muscle tightness is always a sign of muscle weakness. The question is what muscle is not shortening properly that is causing the hip flexors, in this case, because that's what he's pointing to tighten up. Well, the body always will tighten up when it senses instability. And so when there's muscles not supporting a joint properly, it's going to say to whatever muscles, tighten up, tighten up, tighten up, limiting range of motion. If you want to get rid of that muscle tightness, what we need to do is actually start looking at the opposite muscles. And the opposite muscle in this case is the glute max. Well, all of the glute muscles really. We can even throw the hamstrings in there as well. If we got if he is actually feeling a muscle tightness, or if you're feeling muscle tightness, if you got the glutes working properly and strengthened properly, and that they were able to contract and contract on demand, guess what? That muscle tightness goes away. So that's the first point I want to make here. The other insane thing is like, where in your life are you going to do a lunge like this, for God's sakes? Unless you're like Tom Cruise on Mission Impossible, you know, standing on something which is going to separate your legs to an enormous degree, you know, maybe in that case that you're going to need that kind of range of motion. But nowhere in your life are you going to do something like this. So doing a pose like this and saying you've got muscle tightness that you need to address is just so counterintuitive and counterproductive. That is not a good test to see where you've got limitations in range of motion. And I'm going to show you how to check your range of motion shortly and see whether or not your muscles are tight or weak. But right away, one of the things that this kind of talk forgets about so well is the opposites of muscles. Every muscle has a relationship. There's an antagonist and agonist. When the agonist, in this case with this video, his glutes, when those are contracting properly, the opposite muscle will start to relax. And in this case, that's the hip flexors. It's kind of like really crazy to work on stretching the tightness, if you will, because you're not really addressing the problem. The problem is weak glutes. The problem is that his glutes, I'm sure not his glutes, but maybe, that his glutes are not contracting and contracting on demand. Once you increase that contractibility of the glutes, guess what? The psoas will start to relax. And the most interesting thing about the psoas, which never gets any press, is that the glutes and the psoas are actually opposite muscles. They are agonist and antagonist muscles. So let's continue.
When you're in upward facing dog, you feel compression in your lower back.
Okay, so compression. This compression business is such, again, bull pucky. The reason why you feel that compression in your back is because the lower back muscles, again, are not contracting properly. And you're feeling like an instability, if you will, in the joints of your spine, because they're just kind of sitting there as you're forcing this kind of back bend. But when you start to improve those muscles in your lower back, their ability to contract properly, then they're going to start supporting the vertebrae of your spine. I'm 51 years old as I'm making this presentation right now for you, and I can tell you that I can do back bends more effortlessly today and pain-free than I ever have when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. In fact, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, because I had back issues, that was actually an ego that I started developing. So I stayed away from doing all of these delicious poses because I didn't have any stability or an integrity in my lower back. And the most saddest thing about the story is that not one yoga teacher ever was able to tell me that, and ever able to tell me, Aaron, your back problems could go away if you just start doing some simple exercises. And so that's why I'm here making these videos, is to pass on the knowledge that I never had, and I hope that you are able to use it. What he's pointing to here is that the psoas is the culprit of this lower back problem, and that we need to stretch it out. What we know from what I just said is that stretching actually causes more instability. Remember that anytime you have flexibility, you always have instability, and whenever you have instability, there's always the opportunity for injury. So he's doing this thing here where you can like lie on this table and put your leg up. Again, you're just not really addressing the issue, and the issue in this case is glutes that are not working properly. Get the glutes working, boom, all of a sudden you have more range of motion, and more importantly, you have range of motion with stability because your muscles are actually supporting the joints of the body. So this is one. And let's look at one of his other ones here. And now he's having a timer here, and he's saying to hold this for a long period of time. One of the things I actually wanted to say, this is like one of the worst things you can do for your hip flexors, is just kind of, I call it hanging out in the hips. There's no accountability, there's no strengthening, and all that proprioception between your brain and the muscles, gone. Nothing is happening. And again, not doing anything to address the real issue, which is the glutes. And I believe that the last one he's doing here is a variation on what we call in yoga Hanumanasana, or sometimes I refer to it as a hell of an asana. But you know, when I was back in my yoga day, and I used to do this pose a lot, I would go to yoga class, do this yoga pose. I would also do a variation of it called pigeon pose, Raja Kapotanasana. Every single time, the next day, I would sneeze. I would bend over to pick up something. I would brush my teeth. My lower back would seize up. And it used to make me crazy because I used to think like, I am doing everything correctly. I'm doing everything as I've been told I should do, and nothing is working. In fact, I'm getting worse and worse. Some of you know my story. I ended up around the age of 45 in an orthopedic surgeon's office who wanted to do a spinal fusion in my lower back because I had so much instability in my lower back that I had created herniated discs. I actually managed to heal myself through muscle activation practices, but of course the most important way I healed myself was through stop stretching. So if you take one thing away from this conversation, don't do any of these poses. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're actually gonna look at what you should do to fix your psoas. So I have a video called How to Fix Tight Hips, Yoga to Release a Tight Psoas. I actually have a few psoas videos on my channel and in my online library resources. And I address the psoas, and basically it's just repeating a lot of the same practices. But I want you just to kind of like look at this for a moment. Now I'm gonna keep the sound off, so I'm gonna talk you through it so we can just speed through this a little bit here. But one of the ways that you can test to see if you have a strong or weak psoas is you lie on your back, you turn one leg out, you bring it out about 30 degrees. It was actually probably a little bit too far, but then you're gonna lift the leg up about 40 degrees. Now notice what's going on in your body. You might notice that the opposite hip is lifting up. You might notice that the leg feels like a lead weight. You might notice that it's just really challenging. So what you're gonna do now is start to do some muscle activation practices. This is one of my favorite ones, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but it's just a simple hack to basically start firing the psoas. Now, if your psoas is tight, a lot of people don't realize it's actually a weak psoas. Muscle tightness is always muscle weakness. It's either that muscle that's weak and or muscles surrounding it that's weak. Usually the opposite muscle, in this case, the agonist or antagonist. Doing these simple muscle activation technique practices is a way that you can start to improve that communication system between the brain and the muscles, okay? This is just a simple hack, but what's really freaking cool is that when you finish doing it, you can actually come into that first position that we started in and stretch the legs out, externally rotate the leg, and then lift the leg up, and you're gonna notice a huge difference. Did you get stronger? Yes, you got stronger because that psoas muscle is able to contract properly. And guess what? You also got rid of psoas tightness as well. So we also want to look at other ways to fix psoas tightness permanently. And one of the ways to do that is to start getting the glutes activated. And one of my favorite exercises or practices to activate the glutes is bridge pose. Bridge pose is just such a great pose to do. It's just amazing. And yeah, there's a lot of conversations about it. I remember way back when I was just sort of starting yoga, and one of the crazy things that went around was like, you shouldn't have your glutes activated when you're doing bridge pose. They should be really soft. And it's just so ridiculous, because bridge pose is an extension pose, a hip extension pose. And so you should be activating and engaging your glutes. Where we kind of differ here is I don't really care so much about the posture. I know a lot of people get into express your heart and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I just want you to lift your hips up as high as you can. Take your feet about a little bit more than hip distance apart. And then see if you can actually engage your glutes before you lift up. So start to squeeze the glutes and then lift it up. You want to hold it there for about 6 seconds. And you repeat it 6 times. So that's always the general rule in muscle activation, that we do it for 6 seconds and repeat it 6 times. But if you want to fix your psoas issues, if you want to fix your tight psoas issues, this is what you want to be doing every single day. This is such a great pose because so many muscles around, like especially the lower part of the legs, the hamstrings, and then the psoas, of course, start to tighten up because the glutes just are not working properly. So if we get the glutes working, guess what? You're going to start having a psoas that's no longer tight, but more to the point, you'll be able to fix your tight psoas problems permanently. And that's what we're going for. The biggest thing that we're really going for is for you to begin living your best pain-free life, so that you can go out to manifest and live your life purpose. That is my deepest hope and prayer for you as you take these teachings out into the world. I hope that you feel empowered, and when you hear a yoga teacher talking, that you can start to have a better understanding of the language they're using. Does it make sense? And most importantly, does this make me stronger or does this make me weaker? Namaste, my friends. Be blessed.